Hey, welcome to the Growing People podcast. My name is John Losi, and today we're going to sit and have a little chat with Emily Harburg, and she is a PhD candidate at Northwestern in technology and social behavior, and she's gone from an undergrad at Harvard on social anthropology and psychology into coding and technology. We're going to explore a little bit about that. Social behavior. Hold on. And she's gone from an undergrad at Harvard on social anthropology and psychology into somewhere technology. We're going to explore I'm not there. It is. All right. Technical difficulties. We got it out of the way.
Part of it.
So Emily also worked in Disney Imagineering, a dream position of mine. I've known a few of the old school Imagineers. Also interned at Facebook. And now she's co-founded Brave Initiatives, and we're going to explore all that kind of stuff. So thank you, Emily. Thank you for taking the time with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive into all that you're doing with coding and Brave Initiatives and technology, social behavior, I want to hear, I noticed you mentioned something about thoughtlucks.
Yes.
And I want to, that seems so interesting to me. Tell me a little bit about what a thoughtluck is and why you think they're such a good thing.
Yes. So we started Thoughtlucks, I guess it was about 2 years ago, at our first one in Chicago. And the whole point was, how do we get people from around the city together to look at a big topic and discuss it together? And particularly people who might not ever have known each other or been sitting in the same living room together, gather them together for a meal. And so we started off with, I think actually our first one was about what is our purpose and kind of how do you explore purpose. And so we had different people brought food, and everyone was invited to bring a friend who they thought no one else would know. And we had it in my living room, and we just talked about what is purpose and what is our purpose. And we did that over a meal. And then every month I have a Facebook group now online where people can vote on what topic they want to discuss. And we do each month a different neighborhood in a different part of the city, and we'll have different topics. So we've done ones on love, we've done ones on faith, we've done ones on politics, gun violence, all kinds of different things, and gather together around a table. It's usually now about 30 people who come from all different parts of the city and have it. And we also started them in San Francisco and are trying to kind of spread out these kind of eat together, shared around a table, thinking about questions that really prompt you to actually get to know someone much more deeply and talk about things that really matter together.
That's really cool. Do you set up any ground rules when they come in? Do people, how do you manage the conversation with 30 people?
Yeah, we have, and actually we have a website now, thoughtlucks.com, but we have on there recommended ground rules for how to, every time, the way we start is just an introduction. Everyone says who they are and one little icebreaker question about the topic, and then we run through ground rules, and then we give actually suggested questions where you'll go off in a small group and talk about those questions together, and then come back together for dessert and have a whole shared reflection at the very end all together. But yeah, there are ground rules, big ones like step up, step back, make sure that other people's voices are heard. We have like a Vegas rule where what's said there stays there, without names. And so those kind of things that right off the bat kind of set a certain tone.
That's really cool. I'm putting up the website right now so people can get a look at that. And I'll also put it in the show notes so that people know where to find that. What are some of the most the coolest discussions or things that have come up in one of your thoughtlucks?
So there've been, I think one of my favorite ones was about faith. There was this one where I remember there was a group that had grouped off with, there was a Muslim man, someone who was atheist, someone who's Christian, and someone who was Hindu. And the four of them were eating dinner together and talking about what faith meant to them. And that for me was a really powerful one of, it's rare that we even bring that up in our conversations with people about some of our identities, but then having people talk about that. We did another one that was on racism, and which has been a big issue topic in the US, but also in Chicago, given how divided we are in the city. And we did this kind of ice boxing where we put some people in the middle and they spoke and everyone else just had to listen. So tried some different things that it's hard to get people again into a shared space to really talk about those things, and it's uncomfortable, but if you can create the right space for it, it can be so powerful. So Yeah, those have been some of my favorite topics, the ones that are more controversial, but have you talking.
Yeah, and that the ground rules allow that space so voices can emerge.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of some old Quaker approaches to meetings, where
Totally.
the soundings and commission, like compassion commissions and things like that. It sounds like a powerful way to get a neighborhood together. And also, you've heard a lot about the bubbles,
Yeah,
breaking the bubbles so that you hear different voices than you normally do.
totally. And it's interesting what one question can do to open up a conversation that you'd never have. Some people have come with their spouses and they've said, we never talked about this as a couple before tonight. And so it's also interesting what just putting a question out there can do.
And from a different standpoint,
Mm.
uh, networking. I mean, to be able to open up new opportunities to get to know who you are and what you do, not just professional networking, but personal networking, finding resources that you never knew you had.
Completely. Yeah. We stopped even introducing people don't at the beginning they were introducing with their careers, but they started to introduce themselves more with just who they are, what brought them to the city, or it's just something more about themselves. And it's been interesting how it shifts from work to also just wanting to know your neighbor in a different way.
Yeah. Very cool. So I'm curious, you did your undergrad at Harvard in anthropology, social anthropology and psychology.
Correct.
And then you've taken that and now have started an initiative that's about helping uh, uh, high school girls learn how to code.
Yes.
How did that work? How did you get from anthropology, psychology to coding and IT?
Yeah. It's been a journey. I mean, I think I would have said that my self in college would never have thought that I would be a coder, or that I'm now also at a PhD program at Northwestern that's half computer science and half communication studies. I guess just a quick bit of my journey. So I had started, I think, in high school was when it started to form. I just had gotten one bad test grade in a science class, and just decided I wasn't computer science, and just in general sciences weren't my strength. And so I wanted to be a journalist and was really interested in people and kind of what motivated and moved them. And so I ended up going, when I got to Harvard, I looked for a journalism program. They didn't have it. So psychology and anthropology was the closest bet to allow me to kind of look at people and behavior and motivation. And so was there, and anytime there's a computer science class or science class, I would opt out. Really was, had formed this identity again that wasn't my space. So then and after graduation, went and worked at Disney. And while I was there, I was doing a lot around building tools that shape behavior in the park, specifically apps. We'd look at what would motivate people to move to an area of park. So it was all psychology questions. But then I realized that there was this really powerful intersection of psychology and anthropology and people and what moves them. And then how do you design technology that actually really helps people? And so I found this program at Northwestern that was called Technology and Social Behavior that bridged those worlds. I got there and it was a half computer science program, having never coded before. And I went into these classes at Northwestern. I had to start all undergrad classes again in computer science. And
real quick, did you was it common? Was there more coding people, IT people, or psych people in that program when you got there?
I was more coding, I would say. There were a couple of us who, maybe one or two, who hadn't coded before, but we were supposed to go right into computer science grad school classes. And I had to kind of sign an agreement with the program saying, I'm going to learn how to code. I think that they felt that, I'd been doing enough tech work ahead of time at Disney that it was okay. But I had to kind of begin from the bottom per se to really start. So did online class.
Do they make the IT people go to undergrad psych and social science classes?
No, that's a good point. There were, though, they did more HCI classes that were intro courses. So human computer interaction and kind of this intro. But yeah, there were only a few of us who had to actually really go to the undergrad classes, which was fine. But an interesting reminder, I mean, even in those courses, it was mostly men. And so that was, even now, this is a 4 years ago. And I just started to get all these questions of why had I opted out so quickly and so often, and why are so many other women opting out? And obviously a lot of people are looking this question of why there's so few women in STEM and how do you change those numbers. But I started in grad school studying a lot around self-efficacy and confidence, and how do you build up, particularly actually I got a grant through the National Science Foundation around how do you support women's self-efficacy in coding and kind of build tools that help women build confidence in coding. And so I just kind of got curious. I mean, this is or I think it was aligned so well with my interest in motivation and people and psychology. And then with how does that affect, technology, and who's missing from the picture of who's building technology. And so anyway, I was frustrated that at some level of grad school I was studying it, but I couldn't apply it into the community. And so found two other women who were also passionate about that question. And so that was how we started Brave Initiatives, to teach girls how to code. So it was applying the research to really then initiative.
Is that related to, because you hear a lot now about girls in elementary school getting this narrative of I can't, math isn't for girls.
Yes.
And it isn't so overt now, but are you finding some of the roots of those unintentional and covert messages that girls are getting?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting because there actually was some research that just came out that women in developing countries, or women where it's actually less equal for women at some level, there are more women in science in those countries. Whereas in more developed countries where women have more choice, there are fewer women in science. And so even with more gender equality, whereas there's women that are still opting out, which to me is just more evidence of that. A lot of the time it's women stopping themselves. Certainly there are reasons, like you go into a classroom, and like even some of the ones that I went in, and it's all young white men, you're like, this isn't, necessarily an interesting space for me, or a space where I feel like I belong in particular. So there certainly are environmental factors, but I think a lot of the time, whether it's societal or parents or different things, or just yourself, you get a story in your head that this isn't something that I get naturally, so I'm just going to opt out.
Right. So that it gets into growth mindset versus, not that idea that I'm just this way and there's no way I can change, as opposed to building that. And I think it's related to efficacy and all that. But I also heard you say something at least interesting to me, which is when looking at developing nations, more women gravitate towards that out of necessity, and perhaps a first world problem that arises by choice. I don't have to opt in, so it's a little bit uncomfortable, so I'm not going to opt in.
Exactly. Yeah. And that, I think, was what's interesting about choice, which is a good thing. But at the same time, if the computer science doesn't seem interesting to women, or doesn't seem like something that they belong in per se, or that environment, then the fact that they'll opt out is interesting. So I think part of the goal at Brave has been creating a space where there are women, and where they're working on issues that they care about. A whole premise of the camps and the workshops is that you look at issues in the community that you care about and how technology can solve them. So we're not going in with the premise that you have to be a coder, but it might be that you can apply coding to, healthcare, or to animal rights, or to education. How can technology intersect with your other interests?
Yeah, and it's one of these things where you need to be intrinsically motivated, but you also have to be externally focused. And if all your choices are based on me, then your voice is going to be lost where it's needed most. I think about your example of, and this doesn't have anything to do with gender, but the need to have the voice of social science prominent in this program that you're in. There's this assumption that, that's a lesser or less important aspect of this. We can teach the coders social science, but we can't teach the social scientists coding. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. And I think it is interesting. I mean, it's becoming more and more clear right now. If you look at what's happening right now at Facebook and some of these other issues about, we're creating technology, but we're not totally sure how it's affecting people. Because often a lot of people drawn to technology creation, to computer science, are interested just in the computer programming alone, but they're not interested in the social questions as much. And so to me, it's like, more clear than ever that we need the psychologists and the people interested in people and emotional intelligence and resilience and all these things building technology. And we've talked about that a lot with the girls of we need people interested in bullying, studying and building the technology that's creating Snapchat, for instance. Like you need to know and be thinking about what implications this has for society and communities when you build. So to me, it's such a cool moment right now, scary moment too, because we're also creating things that are actually causing complete loneliness, sad, frustration, murders, all kinds of things as a result of the technology we're building. And so we've got to think about that side.
It reminds me of an old Jurassic Park quote of just because we can doesn't mean we should.
That's right.
And teaching people, I think bottom line, teaching people to what I call quality thinking above critical thinking, which is asking those hard questions first of, hey, I can do this. Let me take a deep breath and ask if I should.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's one of the big terms that I'm trying to coin right now is like building more emotionally intelligent technology and kind of how do we, understand and think about the implications of what we're building before we build or as we're building it. And then think about how do you put precautions in place as you design. So we think about that a lot with the girls of what are the implications of what we build and, how that affects people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm assuming that you're saying you're not creating an emotionally intelligent app. It's more applying emotional intelligence as you develop, because the app is going to be, the code is going to reflect whoever the coder's emotional intelligence is.
Exactly. And with anything, if we have one group of people building that, who are interested in one part of it, we're going to be naturally biased, no matter if that group's only women, they're going to, or only men, or only a certain subgroup. We're all unique in different ways, of course, but we're going to have biases of the things we're thinking about from certain groups.
Yeah, so, I think when I think about like a single group working on something, it's not so much they're all unique, but they all have a similar blind spot. Yeah. So you can talk about, yes, we are diverse in each of us brings something unique to the table, but we're all missing one specific piece that creates a huge blind spot.
Yes. And this is kind of the research on the importance of diverse teams really supports this, that actually having more diverse teams means you're going to have less blind spots because you're each thinking about different questions, different parts.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about, you created Brave Initiatives. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that program and get into why is it that coding and those skills, not just getting self-efficacy and confidence for the girls coding, but how coding builds efficacy and transferable self-confidence for them in other areas.
Completely. And that's one of our big things is even if it's a mindset shift when they leave camp of this is, we always look at this. So in basically the way that the program runs is we run week-long camps and then weekend workshops throughout the year. And then we also have different events where the girls can come to, like storytelling events or different things where they'll actually get to continually get inspired throughout the year after attending the camp. And then we have girls come back to help teach other girls. We have apprentice model where the girls will come and then coach and then can actually get internships at Brave and in other tech companies afterwards. So trying to build a pipeline of that. But one of the big things that we say is coding is an amazing chance for you to actually try something. And you get error after error in coding. And that's one of the things that I love most about it is that you are constantly reminded of what you're not able to do. And so in that sense, it's a really powerful kind of reminder of this is, error and failure is totally normal and just part of the process. And so we look a lot at kind of encouraging failure and reminding girls that failure is good and important. So to me, that's been one of the powerful things is that, whether they walk away and say, I want to be a coder, or they walk away and just say, I'm a powerful agent and I can, just because it's something right initially is hard or daunting doesn't mean I can't do it. And so to me, that's been really powerful.
Yeah, I think it's great that you bring up the idea that most of the first codes don't work, and so you realize that if I don't have failure, I'll never get to success, which are huge components of that growth mindset and resilience.
Yeah.
Resilience isn't just getting back on the horse;
Mhm.
it's changing your mindset from the fall as
Yeah.
you get back on the horse. You've got to be different. Resilience means you got to be a little different than
Totally.
when you started.
Yes, and that we actually have some signs and things that we'll put up around the girls, but there are also a lot of things around um, done is better than perfect, and kind of there's this encouragement of leaning away from things needing to be perfect. And like sometimes you'll see a girl working on one thing for hours, one little thing, and and they'll get so bogged down and so frustrated by that one thing. And so that's one thing that we've also really encouraged is, don't, don't get too stuck, ask for help, talk to people. Google, we talk a lot about the power of just learning how to Google things and look things up and realize that we're all learners. And even the best coders will be constantly Googling and trying to figure things out. So a lot of it is around just building a mindset of resilience and of the fact that that just, they might go in thinking that they're not capable at something, but that doesn't mean that they aren't. And so, and some people get it at different speeds and different levels, but that doesn't mean that their voice is any more or less important as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I talk about progress or working towards something, and people have that perfection mindset, which is everything should be a straight line.
Mm-hmm.
But we forget that the substrate is moving, so that straight line is just by definition going to get all wonky.
Exactly.
So do you happen to remember a game called Frogger?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, so that's the picture I give people sometimes about so this frog's trying to go across the road, and if he goes straight, he's going to get whacked by a truck or a car, or he's going to fall into the river.
Yes.
And sometimes progress means stepping sideways or stepping back.
Totally.
And that seemed to be something that spoke to people as they were trying to get rid of this perfectionist mindset. And so we started talking, having not perfect, but optimal.
Totally. Yes. Yes. And that's something it's been cool learning on my own as well as I'm learning with the girls and building things. And I have to kind of in many ways be a role model for them with my own work of, we're learning, we're building, and we have to just also keep pushing out, because I remember actually in college, I took one of my few science classes that I took at the time was a class that was an elective type class. And I remember the teacher said, we need more mediocre female scientists. She's like, we have a lot of excellent female scientists. We don't have many mediocre, because a lot of the mediocre female scientists leave because they think they're not good enough at it. And she's like, there are a lot of male mediocre scientists, but not as many women. And so
do the stats on that, and you're going to have that curve where for the women it's skewed towards excellence, and for the men it's probably skewed towards mediocrity.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of, you get, again, kind of like with that one test grade, but you build up something where you got to be perfect otherwise. And I don't know, again, why women are more inclined to feel that way. And certainly some men are as well. But there's a mindset of, I'll opt out if I'm not good enough at it. Or I won't apply to that job if I don't have all the criteria. Whereas they find that women and men have the same resumes women will apply to less jobs because they think they're less qualified than men. So it's just an interesting mindset as well.
That fixed piece where, you look at the great scientists and people who are great at almost anything have that, I wonder what this is going to look like. And they don't really care if it works or not. They just want to see what it might be. Exactly. And there's so many people with a fixed mindset that are just thinking in terms of, that's probably not going to work, so I'm not going to try it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's in a good way. There have been now some researchers who've now talked more about this and growth mindset and grit. And it's an interesting thing in a wonderful way that we're starting to be more aware of it and see it in ourselves as well. So that's part of what we want the girls to do too, is call themselves out when they say, no, I don't get this. It's like, that was Carol Dweck's whole thing of the power of yet, a lot of it, I don't get it yet. I don't, I'm not a coder yet. I'm not. So I think that's been also interesting applying that research.
Yeah. And on the other side, there's Duckworth and Dweck and this movement towards the mindset perspective and grit. Well, this isn't new stuff. It's classic Western and Middle Eastern philosophy explores all kinds of aspects of it. I've been compelled by a book called Resilience by Eric Greitens, who's talking about, you know what, let's take a look at the classic philosophy and how this impacts how you move forward, how you come back from failure, and acknowledging that there's always going to be things you can't control in your life. And if you focus on that, that's wasted effort. Focus on what you can have an impact on and the positive aspects of that. So I love the fact that both modern or more recent research in social sciences supports what has been put out there as classical wisdom for a long time.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah, it is. It's in some ways it's repurposing as what innovation is. In many ways, it's like repurposing different ideas, but coming up with also a way where we, can get it now. We see it in different practical applications, but it affects everything and all different. To me, that's what's so exciting about it is you can think about it for anyone at any job at any stage of their life, as parents, as any kind of moment and stage. There's a big the power of what we can control is pretty interesting. So yeah, I'm excited that more people are talking about it and thinking about it.
Yeah. Now, I spent the first half of my adult career life working in camps and camp settings and adventure programming.
Yeah.
Why is Brave Camp? Why did you choose camp as a model or a methodology for what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, we get asked that a lot because it's typical models are after school programs or in different, and there were a number of reasons. I think actually each of my co-founders and I had all had pretty powerful camp experiences where we had gone in during the summers and had these kind of immersive experiences when you're around a lot of other people. For each of us, it was mostly women, and you're around and you have counselors that you can look up to, and that kind of having this really deep, intense, immersive experience can be so powerful. And so that was one of our. We thought about schools, one setting where you can learn, but camp was kind of this out of your comfort zone in a different zone. So we really like the immersive, intense experience of camp. But also accompanied with these built relationships. And so the benefit, for instance, in Chicago, we run these programs, but now they're in a number of different cities. And part of it is that people from the community are teaching the camps and coming in and working with you. And then throughout the year, you can keep coming back and getting to know those girls. And so we draw from women from a bunch of different schools to come together, and mostly low-income schools, but we also have girls who just sign up from higher income schools as well, who will just come together. And it's this powerful community where girls who never would have interacted, honestly, similar to the thought luck that I talked about at the beginning, come together at a table and say, what's a problem that we care about deeply from our different communities, and how do we solve it with technology? So the mindset was, let's bring them together in this intensive, and by the end of the camp, they're, in 1 week, even they're, hugging and messaging and, kind of meeting up for dinner together and doing all these things. And so building that relationship, and then afterwards, keeping them in community afterwards. So I think for us, that's been really powerful, building that kind of community through camp and then continuing it throughout the year.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the more excellent camp programs do, is think in terms of bridging from season to season and making sure that there's more than one touch. I was lucky enough to work for a camp called Forest Home that did we really focused, our camp programming was to support the local area. It was a Christian camp, so it was local churches. We designed our program to be part of the overall local program, not to be in something in and of itself. So that whole relationship piece is so important in that.
It is. And and I think for me too, I mean, faith was an interesting one because I had also gone to a faith-based sports camp growing up. And that was, even if I went back to an environment that was less faith-based, at school or elsewhere, that camp experience and faith was actually really important for my own faith journey. So I think for me, that was also interesting of, you might not necessarily be around, in a school environment. They might go back to their schools here and let's say they don't have a supportive environment around coding, but if they still have that strength from the camp setting and those relationships, then that can be their kind of bedrock as they grow through the year and that support group and community. So for me, I think there's something powerful about even 1 week can really be a
Oh,
powerful, a couple of weeks can be a very powerful ongoing community.
yeah, a mountaintop coding experience where you realize that power, but when
Yeah.
you go back into your regular context, that gets diluted or
Yeah.
replication error. So
Yes.
being able to go back and get a little bit more, I think the storytelling stuff is excellent. I'm a big believer in storytelling as a powerful path towards development and learning, and being
Yes.
able to hear the stories. I think both challenge and success
Yeah.
that others are experiencing is powerful.
Yes. Yeah, and that's been cool too, having the girls share their own stories together. We have a number of girls who are still like one girl, for instance, I'll tell you, is built an. She first built a website around this business she wanted to start called Good Waste, which teaches about. It's basically a business that she's creating now that recycles things and sells the products to people, and then puts the money back into recycling. But then she's been continuing to work on it throughout the year. But then part of that has been because she keeps meeting with her teammates and have this community of others around her. So it's also been cool to kind of see what the stories that they can inspire each other and kind of keep that going throughout the year. So I'm a big believer that camp can really create this bond, which is hard to create in school or in other settings, even though you can, but it's harder.
Yeah, I do professional and organizational development, but at my heart, at my core, I'm an old camp guy.
Yes. I love it. I'm with you.
So
Yeah.
tell me this.
Yes.
I like to, mentioned this a little bit, but what are your thoughts on the role of STEM and STEAM programs in education, and how does it impact non-STEM or STEAM professions?
Getting how STEAM affects non-STEM
Well,
professions, or kind of.
because the way STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and STEAM
Yes.
is adding the art component in there.
Yep.
And
Yep.
many people would say that there are more jobs and careers that don't leverage those particular specialties.
Yes.
So how does these programs in our educational system impact people who are going a different path?
Definitely. Got it. I mean, to me, a lot of it is around the mindset of learning these skills. And then, so particularly if you train, well, one, I think technology is shaping everything now. So it's almost like you can't escape it. I know I was reading an article the other day about how a lot of people in medicine are now having the challenge of having to change their whole practices that they've been doing for years and years, because they now have to put it all online and tech and have it based. So I think, in some ways, there's almost like the Teach for America, TFA mindset of you go and teach for a little bit, and then you take it with you for whatever career you go into afterwards. I think in a similar way, learning about STEM, and if they even get a basic intro to coding and can learn about it, that will give them a different mindset for wherever they go. And I know we've talked a lot to the girls about, if you can understand this and even speak the language of technology, then whatever career you go into, you're going to probably work with developers at some level, because they're going to be guiding and helping build technologies for the systems. And so being able to have that literacy is really important. And so that's obviously only the technology piece of STEAM. But I do think that there are, understanding math, understanding the sciences generally can really help give you a verbiage and also a mindset of thinking about how do you create solutions in the world.
I
Yeah.
was going to say, you get that when you throw in that art component that, first of all, I'm not one of the people, I think that you can't separate out STEM or STEAM from any profession or because it teaches you how to think. It teaches you how to problem solve. The adding the art component in there gets that more holistic outside of data perspective, and that, let's get a big picture on how this is formed as we try and create something useful. And so I stand in the corner that if you're not getting all that, you're not going to be prepared.
Yes. No, I agree. And I think we do a lot in the design piece of the camps around getting the girls to draw and prototype and envision. But I think that intersection of technology and art is really a powerful one. And actually, my sister-in-law was half art, half engineering. And I think getting those brains together, and my advisor at Northwestern, Liz Gerber, actually does a lot in that intersection as well of the arts combined with the way that you design technology. And so I totally agree. I think it's a mindset and a like building creativity, building problem solving, which are going to be important wherever you go, whatever you do.
Yeah. Well, we're going up against some time here, but I want to hit a couple more things, just more quicker questions here.
Yeah.
One is, you say that you teach leadership skills to these girls as well.
Yeah.
What do you think are the top 2 or 3 qualities that make a great leader?
Ooh. Let's see. Top 2. There's so many. So I think a couple of things that we look at specifically within the camp, just because they are so important in leading technical teams. So one of them is around just working in teams, being like teamwork oriented, and kind of looking out for how to basically what voices aren't being heard and how do you give feedback. So this kind of piece of teamwork, which is quite broad and affects a lot of things around feedback, around the way you navigate dynamics in the team, that comes up a lot, especially, and I think it's important again in all teams, but in these teams with girls who are from very different backgrounds and communities, it's critical that they understand how to really work and give feedback and talk to each other in a team. So the community
on that topic, when I'm working with executives,
Yeah.
they're really intentional about how they lead teams,
Yeah.
but they forget that they're always part of a team as well.
Mhm.
Leading is very different than teaming.
Yes. Yes, completely. So yeah, so that piece of things, and we do a lot of feedback, pluses and deltas, and at the end of every session and when they're working in groups. But I think that piece is very important in understanding how to operate and how to go. There's so many other skills, I think, and I'd say empathy also falls into that piece of really understanding the team. Another skill that I think is critical is kind of in the power of your voice, and we look a lot at how to help the girls, and it falls into self-efficacy too. How do they really believe in themselves and their own abilities to be able to lead and to design? And so for a lot of these women, you come in, and leaders generally, a lot of people who should be leading aren't, because they don't think that they're leaders. And so we talk a lot about how even if you're quiet, that doesn't mean that you're not a leader, but a lot of it is around kind of your mindset of the impact that you want to make and what you see your role as. And so it's been interesting because sometimes girls come in who are, louder and kind of assume the role, but then there are other girls that actually, can kind of lead quietly and from another stand. So for me, a big part of another trait of leadership is this kind of mindset of being a leader, of realizing your power and your role. And so we do a lot in the camps too about that piece of things of, really commanding authority with your voice and owning a space at some level, with believing that you have something to contribute, no matter your style, or and how do you also utilize your strengths in that power. So yeah, I think there's both the team oriented piece, but also your own mindset, which I think are 2 critical skills that we try to build in leaders.
Susan Cain's work on introversion, great stuff.
She's awesome.
There's also, I don't know if you've heard of a book called The Power Paradox.
No, I haven't.
It's a guy named Dacher Keltner. Huh. And basically what he did is he looked at schools, but he also looked at who comes to leadership or who gets the power in different groups.
Huh.
And it's a lot of the emotional intelligence skills, including empathy, listening, helping other people's voices be heard. Those are the ones who rise to power.
Huh.
And then they lose power because they stop doing those things and take them for granted, and stop all the stuff that they did that helps them gain and maintain power.
Yes.
As soon as they stop focusing on that and doing the things that bullies tend to do, that's when they lose power. It was a really interesting read. I heard it on a podcast a while ago, so I went out and got the book, and it was a fascinating study.
I love that. It is. I mean, this is something I talked to my dad, Fred Harburg, about, is that this kind of, there's a lot of paradox in the way that we lead and work. And so kind of understanding, when do you use these different strengths? I love it. I'll have to read that. How do you utilize your different parts of you to actually know when to utilize that aspect of who you are. So there are times when in meetings it's important to be watching people and observing how, how they're doing, but there are also times when you just need to say, this is what we're going to do. This is the meeting, this is where we need to go with the meeting. You can't constantly be worrying about all the different dynamics and seeing people. So it is interesting where they fall.
Yeah, it gets into that quality thinking, which comes from a pause where you drive your decision making and judgment from the amygdala into prefrontal cortex executive function stuff. And that comes from learning the emotional self-management skills.
Yes.
And that's where that decision making and choicefulness, you're reminded of those things, and you're not necessarily always feeling the urgency to act.
Exactly. Yes.
So, talking about podcasts and stuff.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about, like, what are your go-to blogs and podcasts? And I realize you're probably right now immersed in your research and things, but they don't even have to be on topic. But do you have like go-to blogs or podcasts that you read or listen to?
Yes, a couple. I probably shouldn't have time for them, but I do, and I spend a lot of time on the train, so that's kind of been one of my routes. But I listen to How I Built This, which is a podcast on NPR, which you've probably heard of, but it's a lot of entrepreneurs share their stories, and I obviously have the entrepreneurial heart in me, whether that was how that came from my family or how that. But I love that podcast. Also from NPR, This American Life, I think the anthropologist, psychologist in me always loves stories and kind of hearing how people moved. And so both of those are two podcasts on NPR that I love, and just find the topics that actually This American Life also was sparked some of my interest in the Thought Lux, because it was a topic, and think about how do you get people to share their stories together. So those are two go-to, and also two of my friends are doing their own podcast now, which has been fun to listen to. One is doing one called Not Your Girlfriend's Sports Show, which is women talking about sports, and I've loved to listen to that. And then the other one is Claire Liu, who runs a company called Know Your Company. She started podcasts around leaders and interviewing different leaders who kind of better understanding their employees. So in free time on the train.
Yeah, in all that free time.
Yeah.
Have you ever listened to 99% Invisible with Roman Mars?
I have not, but I've heard it's great.
Yeah, and it's weird because I'm not a designer, but in listening to that, it tweaks my brain in how I think about leadership in organizations, because the design mindset is so helpful when you're stuck in thinking in different ways. So I just appreciate that tickling my brain a little bit.
I love that.
So tell me about this. What kind of apps or programs do you use professionally or personally that you find most helpful? Which are you kind of the ones you find yourself clicking on the most?
Yes, but so it's interesting with technology. I have been reflecting a lot on what becomes habit, and I'm building an app for my dissertation right now that's around helping support onboarding of newcomers, but helping you feel supported in your company, and like you have a partner that you can go to in your company. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do you have a couple go-to apps or things that actually help your life and improve your life. But my tendency has been, as many, maybe millennials or kind of this generation, has been to go onto Facebook and Instagram and all these things, which tend for me to make me feel worse after I go on them.
Lots of research around that.
Yeah. And so I've been actually this morning, I took Facebook off my phone. I'm still on Facebook for all my Facebook employees and teammates out there. Obviously worked there for a while and really believe in a lot of parts of the company. But I realized I was just going on and wasting a lot of time. And so I've been thinking about how do you remove things that just cost time and also really create social comparison and improve things that you enjoy. So I have an app, for instance, now in the mornings that it's obviously more religious based, but it's called Pray As You Go. And it's this, my parents had told me about it, but it kind of in the morning, it gives you a little something to dwell on as you're waking up. And so for me, I much prefer starting the day that way than going right onto Facebook or Instagram and getting me aware of all, getting right off the bat going into comparison and different things. So that's been one that I really like in the mornings. I also really have enjoyed I have another app that's specifically for running, and I'm a runner, and I played volleyball in college and have like an athletic competitive mindset to me. So it's been Run Keeper is the one that I'm using right now, but it just lets you track your runs and the things that you're doing as you go. I did some work in graduate school around exercise apps as one area, and what motivates people to want to exercise, and specifically looking at older women and how do you motivate exercise in older women. And so anyway, that area to me is interesting. So those are two right now that actually I think make me happier when I use the app rather than make me feel more skeptical.
Yeah. Yeah. Look at the impact of the apps that you're clicking on.
Exactly. Yeah. And be conscious about it, I think, too.
Well, I really want to talk to you more about developing an app for the work that I do around, especially the professional development piece, and making it more interesting than a lot of. My go-to app used to be a thing called MindBloom, and they stopped supporting it. And I've been having a really hard time finding something that's engaging enough. I totally believe in the accountability that comes with habit trackers and all that kind of stuff, but most of them are pretty bland. And maybe I'm just a sucker for the gamified pieces of it, and that's my simple brain. But trying to find something that's really going to move me, reinforce my intrinsic motivation to keep moving and keep going when I don't feel it.
Totally. Yeah.
So we'll have to talk some more about that.
Let's do it. That's what I research now.
Yeah. Emily, thank you so much for spending the time. And I look forward to, we're going to put all the, as much as I can remember, the links to the things we talked about into the show notes. So, hey, everybody, if you get a chance, take a look at this stuff. Look at the Brave Initiative. Take a look at that. See how you might be able to support that. I tell you, I've got another podcast that I do called Living Life Juicy. I think the Thought Luck is going to be a piece of that one.
I love it.
Thanks again. We'll talk soon. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.